Hello, my name is Justin McClue, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we're going to the seedy part of town, because we're going to be talking about Poverty Row. What is that, Will?
Poverty Row, in the golden age of Hollywood, you had your Paramounts, your Warner Brothers, your MGMs.
Making the big musical comedies for the whole family to enjoy.
But, you know, sometimes you gotta have stuff for the second half of that double bill, especially during the war years. Mm-hmm. So there were the other studios, the studios in the not great part of town, the studio with the lesser facilities, the studios that, instead of taking a gross percentage on the box office, would sell their movies to states and theaters on a rental basis. And then if you could calculate in advance how much you were going to make from those rentals, you could be in profit before you even started the movie. So there's no motivation to even make them good.
But supposedly, they wouldn't even have that much of a big cut. They would make only 10% over their line of what the movie costs to make. And they made them cheap.
And there was also no motivation to make them much better because, like, did you really want to chip away at that small percentage of profit you were guaranteed to get?
Dave Kerr, the critic, wrote in 1990, "A director on Poverty Row labored on films in the absolute certainty that no film critic would see them, no sophisticated public would encounter them, and no financial reward would ever accrue.
And Dave Kerr recently programmed a retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art of some of the better Poverty Row films. I think for those of us who are interested in movies, the Poverty Row movies are interesting for two reasons. One, because you get stuff like, you know, Bela Lugosi horror movies, Charlie Chan mysteries, Bowery Boys comedies.
Edgar G. Elmer films.
Well, okay, that's the second part, though. Like, if you have a soft spot for those kinds of shittier genres, though, you know, if you like Bowery Boys movies, if you like shitty horror movies, then, you know, Poverty Row has that. But also, toiling within Poverty Row were a handful of great or good or adequate directors who tried to bring something to it.
Usually from Europe.
Yeah, usually from Europe. And oftentimes, like, in the face of, as Dave Kerr said, just, like, insurmountable indifference. Mm-hmm. Like, you could be William Bodine, a silent film veteran who got stuck in Poverty Row in his middle and old age, and just kind of cynically churning out one movie after another.
There's a reason they called him One Shot Bodine.
Yeah, and just being like, well, this is it for me, and I'll just you know, make shit. Or you can be Edgar G. Elmer, who we've talked about on a previous episode, European emigre, former colleague of F.W. Murnau, who winds up through circumstance and bad luck making movies in Poverty Row and trying against all odds to bring a little bit of that German expressionist flair to these movies, even though it will get him nowhere.
So what we ended up doing for this podcast is the history of Poverty Row encompasses a whole bunch of companies. There's like a big three, which we're going to talk about, and there's also different kinds of movies. Like, it spans so many different genres. So we actually watched 5 films that we're going to go in chronological order. And the first one that we watched was Hitler's Madman by a little filmmaker called Douglas Sirk.
This is one of the interesting things about Poverty Row. In addition to all these, like, silent film vets who had fallen on hard times, in the history of Poverty Row, there are a handful of directors who later went on to better things, and this was sort of their training ground. So Sirk in this case, but also, you know, Phil Carlson started in Poverty Row, later made The Phoenix City Story. Joseph H. Lewis, who later made The Great Gun Crazy, started with The Invisible Ghost, starring Bela Lugosi, and that's considered, I think, the best Monogram Pictures Bela Lugosi movie.
And we should point out that it was really difficult to talk about Poverty Row and somehow avoid Bela Lugosi and Edgar G. Elmer, because if you search that term, they're the films that pop up the most.
Yeah.
So for Hitler's Madman, this was a film that was shot in 1943 and was designed purely as a piece of exploitation and propaganda against the Nazis. It has the interesting distinction that while it was a Poverty Row picture that was shot in a week, it was bought by MGM and re-released after they shot a bunch of footage to pad it out.
Yeah, so it's like 90 minutes now, I think, but it probably would have been like 70 minutes before. It has a good Poverty Row cast. John Carradine is in it, the fated comedian Edgar Kennedy, best known as the popcorn salesman in Duck Soup.
Ava Gardner shows up for a brief moment.
Ava Gardner is one of the kind of biggest stars to emerge from Poverty Row. She was in, I think, Ghosts on the Loose with the Bowery Boys and Bela Lugosi. This was a PRC movie, is it not?
Yes, it was.
Producers Releasing Corporation was, I think, at the very bottom rung of Poverty Row. They are reputed to have never spent $100,000 on a movie, and in fact, most of their movies probably would have cost like what, 25,000, like much lower than 100,000. They're best known for having Edgar G. Ulmer as their star director, but otherwise, all their movies, you know, were a 1 week shoot. But I mean, despite the fact that they were 1 week shoot, I think like pound for pound, they probably had some of the best movies to come out of Poverty Row.
I mean, they have Detour under their name, Ulmer's masterpiece.
They have that. They have The Devil Bat, you know, my favorite movie of all time. And they also had another guy called Frank Wisbar, who is like Ulmer, another European emigre who, you know, tried to bring a little bit of style to his movies. He made a movie called Strangler of the Swamp, and he made Devil Bat's Daughter,
which you watched this week.
Well, we'll get to Devil Bat's Daughter in a bit. Let's talk about Hitler's Madman.
So Hitler's Madman is a film that's shockingly such a downer. Like, you would think that in the time of war, what they would want to show is, look how villainous the Nazis are, and look what we can do to rise up against them. But instead, because they're shakily documenting something that really happened, the film ends up ending with the entire town and every character that we've met being brutally murdered by the Nazis. So it's more of like a call to arms, like you have to do something about that, as opposed to the fluffy popcorn pulp Poverty Row picture I expected it to be.
Do you see much of Cirque's later personality in this film? Cirque, of course, later made All That Heaven Allows and Written in the Wind, and became kind of the quintessential, as they would call them, women's picture director, but who brought a lot of kind of subversive
I think there's a lot of competency in this film. There's a bunch of fog. The camera moves way more than you would expect for a Poverty Row picture.
I feel like we're going to say this a lot in this episode because, like, trying to find the art in Poverty Row, a lot of it just comes down to like
fog and
nifty shadows and a camera that moves, because most like William Bodine movies are very static because that's the easiest thing to do, or most Poverty Row movies have very few, like, not a lot of cutting, you know, very basic composition. So any director like Frank Wisbar with Devil Bat's Daughter, he got some nifty compositions in there.
Well, I could see that Cirque with this film was trying to do different stuff, and as opposed to blowing up in his face, it actually paid off in a way that he does craft characters that you care about, and the performances are solid, and that even in the finale, where a character perishes right before the end that you would not expect to, I think that's a kind of shock that you hope you would see with things like Poverty Row, because you have this idea that at Poverty Row, while you had to make them fast, it was also very hands-off. Like, people go, you know, as long as you deliver on this day, and that you have a complete film with beginning, middle, and end, we don't care what you do. And you can feel Douglas Sirk kind of struggling with that, but still finding his own direction to it. As far as how it compares to, like, his color, drama-driven pictures that starred women later on, it's tough for me to make that comparison because they're so drastically different. I've seen people write, like, oh, you can see the subtextual layers between both of them, and it's like, come on. Well, I know John Carradine's just hamming it up.
Well, you know, this week I watched Edgar G. Ulmer's Isle of Forgotten Sins, and, like, the problem when you get to the stage that I am in with Edgar G. Ulmer fandom, which is I want to see everything he's ever done, but I've seen all the good ones, so now I'm, like, reduced to, like the dregs of his filmography. The problem is that you find yourself being like, oh, the camera moved there. Ah, the master at work.
Look at that shadow on the wall. Yeah. It's so expressionist.
Yeah, and how does this story fit in with Ulmer's thematic preoccupations, you know? When in reality...
Listen, he had 5 days and he had to finish it.
Yeah, like, they can't all be Detour.
But when you're kind of trawling through Poverty Row, you can stumble on a film like Hollow Triumph, aka The Scar, which came out in 1948, and was directed by Steve Seckley, a director from Budapest. And this is the kind of film that you're like, this is what I want.
Oh, I mean, most Poverty Row movies, unfortunately, are boring.
Yes.
But this one is like rat-a-tat, you know, really, really fast. Like, it is like what you want when you get a pulp story.
And it's actually kind of smartly written. Like, it anticipates everything you think is going to happen and does it a little bit earlier just so it can twist in a different direction.
This one stars Paul Henry, best known as Victor Laszlo in Casablanca, playing a gangster who's just been released from prison and wants to go on one last job, but things go wrong and he has to assume the identity of his doppelganger, a famous psychiatrist. And this psychiatrist looks exactly like him, except that he has a scar on one cheek. And
does he make a mistake and put it on the wrong cheek?
Yeah. Paul Reed scars himself on the wrong side.
And the film anticipates this and tells the main character right away.
The plot is like super goofy, but played absolutely straight. Like, before he assumes the psychiatrist's identity, he starts an affair with the psychiatrist's girlfriend.
Yes, that's right.
It's a little far-fetched, but like, this is a movie where the cheapness really becomes style. I'm thinking of the early scene when Paul Reed sticks up the casino. The casino in this movie is like just a warehouse space, an absolutely nondescript space, like a blank wall behind, and it's like 5 tables with some lights. Nothing about it looks like a casino, but the way it's presented, it looks like a stylistic choice. The way it's lit, it looks like this stark idea of a casino.
The director has so much control over every element of this film. The editing, the cinematography, shot in all these like wide-angle lenses that make the picture look slightly off.
Well, he's always doing something interesting visually. He's always doing something to keep you on your toes, whether it's like having somebody in the foreground and then having somebody right behind them in the background, like taking advantage of all the, I guess, planes of space that are available to him. Because like most William Bodine's movies, for example, are very like...
person right in the center of the frame.
Yeah, person right in the center of the frame. Or like... Steve Seckley, the director of this film, is always doing stuff for like Chiaroscuro lighting.
Yeah, and that's what I love about the idea of Poverty Row. When someone tells me this, especially when you see Detour as the first film, you go, man, are they all going to be like this? Yeah. Spoiler, no.
Well, it might just be worth saying that, like, Detour, one of the great things about Detour is, it was filmed in California, so Ulmer didn't have access to New York. So what he did was he just took like a street sign, saying like 72nd Street or whatever, and then he shot just fog everywhere to make it look like a foggy night where all you could see was the street sign in New York. And not only did it cover the fact that he had no set, but it made it look like New York was this foggy memory.
And it also imposes this auteuristic vision on the film that makes it feel different than other pictures.
Yeah.
And I think that when you're watching all these films, especially noirs, when you have this idea, this heightened sense of style, it brings something to the movie, even if the picture at the end of the day is just a Tales from the Crypt episode.
Yeah. Well, as we said about Edgar G. Ulmer, like, one of the things that made him interesting was his resourcefulness. And his career, had he been able to work at like Warner Brothers or Universal for a more extended period of time, his career might have been less interesting because, like, yeah, his authorial signature was his resourcefulness, his creativity. And maybe this could lead us into the next movie we're going to talk about, Macbeth by Orson Welles.
Yeah. So Macbeth is a guest appearance from a very famous filmmaker in Poverty Row, and there's a very specific reason for that, which is that he wanted to prove to the studios that he could make a picture in a specific amount of time.
23 days, I believe, on this one, which is now how all low-budget movies are shot.
Like 10 days, or 5 days if you're David Dakota.
Yeah, this was made at Republic Pictures, which has been described as the MGM of Poverty Row. They had higher budgets. They're kind of like B-plus movies, basically.
And the founder, Herbert Yates, was convinced by Orson Welles, because there's always a feeling, even with any company, that maybe we could be a little bit more respectable, and Orson Welles kind of promised that to them. He was going to do a reimagining of Macbeth on the big screen, and he had experience doing it because he had done Voodoo Macbeth on Broadway, which was an all-black cast, and he used a lot of those ideas in his film version.
And Republic Pictures has kind of like a canon film style, like Double Life, where they also paid for John Ford's The Quiet Man and Rio Grande. They made Nicholas Ray's Johnny Guitar. So they had these artistic aspirations in addition to all the kind of like outdoor westerns they did, which were really their specialty. And we'll get to that in a minute. But
so Macbeth actually has all the elements that you would associate with a Poverty Row production. Shot all on sets. In this case, supposedly old Western sets that they redressed.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
All with this stylish use of shadows and light. And it actually feels, to my mind, almost a little bit too stage-bound.
Well, I was watching it on this viewing trying to think, like, what is Orson Welles' take on Macbeth? Why does he want to make this play at this time. I don't think there's an answer as clear-cut as, like, he clearly identified so much with the story of Falstaff, and he had a real idea of what he wanted to say with the Falstaff story. I don't think he has anything particular that he has no particular revisionist take on Macbeth, except for the fact that it's the idea of making Macbeth under these conditions.
And it may also be the idea that he wanted to make a Shakespearean film in this style that would be as cinematic as possible. Because when you think of Shakespeare at a certain point, you think of stage boundness. But at this period of time, people like Laurence Olivier, and in this case, Orson Welles, was trying to do something different with it, to the point that he edited down the actual stage play a lot and rewrote new scenes to make it flow better.
Well, I mean, this movie is simultaneously very ostentatiously cinematic and highly theatrical. It's a movie about, like, the tactile pleasure of a set.
Yes.
I mean, so much of, like it's this big,
and it's a massive set.
Well, it's this massive, big, rocky set that looks super fake. It looks like the Batcave in an old Batman serial, and, like, there's a blank white backdrop around it, and there's just, like, like a flat, textureless floor underneath it. And, like, there will be times when we're supposed to be in the castle, but it's clearly just the same as any other part of the set. So, like, he wants you to look at a stage set.
Yeah, he does.
And see the beauty of its artificiality.
And at the same time, he's using the camera in ways that you would associate with the theater, which is that things just run, but he's also manipulating them to specifically make you feel certain ways. There's this one super long shot where Macbeth murders the king that is done in one seamless looking take.
Yeah.
And the camera shifts to a low angle on him, to a high angle, all depending on what the feelings of the scene is. And also, because the set is so big, it allows a level of depth that's crazy that you don't usually associate with cinema, especially Poverty Row in this period of time.
Well, that scene in particular is an example of how the movie is both very theatrical and very cinematic, because it's a long, unbroken performance, and yet he's able to, manipulate the camera to make us look at it in a million different ways. And then, there's another scene like the one where Macbeth is ranting and there's an obvious, like, wind machine on him. And then there'll be lightning that, like, flashes shadows on the blank wall behind him. Or, like, actually there are some times when you see people's shadows against the sky, ostensibly.
But I feel like that's all on purpose. Like,
yeah, of course.
Orson Welles is not just, like, shooting. He's like, I got it. That's all I have. To the point that he kept, after this movie came out, Republic wasn't too happy with it.
Well, I mean, he was his usual self, where he sort of, like, didn't spend a lot of time in the editing room, and they were kind of frustrated with it. This movie actually had 2 releases. It came out in 1948, where it was released kind of in the shadow of Laurence Olivier's Hamlet, which won Best Picture that year and was a very prestigious production, but also, a rather less cinematic production and a rather less imaginative one than this one. But I think it's still a good movie. Got a great Olivier performance. But, that was what was in fashion at the time. And so this movie was a notable financial and critical failure. And then they released it again 3 years later with another 20 minutes cut out, and the Scottish accents, the bad Scottish accents, dubbed over.
Now, do you have a particular version that, like, which one did you watch for this?
I watched the complete version.
Did you see the no accent version that was like 89 minutes?
I haven't seen it.
It's on the Blu-ray that just came out by Olive Films.
I'll get to it eventually. I like this movie a lot. It's super fun. I've seen better versions of Macbeth. This movie is about the idea of, like, what if a Poverty Row studio made Macbeth, and what if a great director like Orson Welles worked in a Poverty Row context. It's an experiment in that.
But moving on from Macbeth, which is more of a blip in Poverty Row, like, this kind of stuff didn't happen very often. It was more a case of films like The Golden Stallion, which came out in 1949, which was a Roy Rogers Pictures, who was a cowboy, who was very friendly, loved to sing, had a horse named Trigger, went on adventures.
Trigger is the smartest horse in Hollywood, according to the opening credits of this movie.
Yeah, and this movie does not treat Trigger very well.
So The Golden Stallion is probably the best known Roy Rogers Trigger Western right now, and it's entirely, I think, because of the advocacy of Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino is a fan of the director, William Whitney. In fact, Tarantino has said that he prefers Whitney to John Ford, which is a bit of, like, contrarianism, I think.
Well, William Whitney is very good at what he does, which is unpretentious, make it fast, add a lot of action, keep it moving. That's the William Whitney style. He actually has an autobiography that I don't remember the exact title, but it's like kick in the door, throw a punch, run outside.
Well, that's what Tarantino likes about Whitney's approach to...
Then why doesn't he learn it for his own films? Like, come on, Tarantino.
Like he's made the case that William Whitney brought a leaner, more two-fisted style to the Roy Rogers Westerns. And I have to say, I really enjoyed this movie. I think it's got everything you could want in a movie. Like, it's got
songs,
it's got fistfights, it's got like horse chase scenes, it's got lasso stunts.
This is a film,
and it's like 67 minutes.
That was also made by Republic Pictures. That has the amazing fact that it was shot in True Color, which was a weird color process that only Republic used because it was two-strip.
Yeah.
So the colors are weird.
It's out of date. It looks like the sort of color movies that were being made in the mid-30s. It's like blue and red color.
Yeah, like white sometimes shows up as like blue, so like a horse looks like it dyed its hair punk.
Yeah, I think it looks really cool.
And this is a film that is also shockingly dark in what happens in it, which is the fact that a bad cowboy tries to steal a horse, and that horse kills him, and Trigger gets blamed, Roy Rogers' horse. So Roy Rogers takes the blame himself and ends up going to jail for 3 years under manslaughter charges.
And meanwhile, Trigger goes out on his own. He's kidnapped by these criminals
and tortured and
put into slavery. But then he escapes, and eventually Trigger fucks, and Trigger has Trigger Jr.
And don't worry, the female horse who gives birth to the little Trigger Jr. dies. And we keep cutting back to her over and over again, dead on the ground.
But I think it's so cool, Roy Rogers in prison for 3 years taking the fall for Trigger, and he takes, he's okay with it.
I can only imagine, because this was made for children, that they have no concept of 3 years and how long that must feel. Because Roy Rogers gets out of jail, he went on some summer vacation. He's not bothered by it at all.
Do you like this is my very first Roy Rogers film.
I've never seen any Roy Rogers films. I love it. It has everything that I want in movies.
And I think Roy Rogers, I could get into this guy. He's charming and likable.
There's a brutal fist fight between two guys in this movie that actually made me go, wait, are they all like this? The answer is probably no.
Yeah, but like Roy Rogers, he could beat you up, but he doesn't want to. He wants to sing. He wants to hang out with Trigger.
The film is constantly establishing the fact that they don't have their guns, so nobody can be shot.
I was impressed by a lot of the chase scenes in this movie, like the scenes of stampeding horses, and the scenes of Trigger chasing somebody where the camera is moving along with Trigger. I mean, it's this hard fucking work making a movie like this.
And it's an example of someone like William Whitney could have done just the bare minimum, but he's not.
Yeah.
He wants this to be entertaining. Even though he believes it's disposable, it'll play at a matinee one day and then be forgotten. He puts it all in.
It's incredible how economic a piece of storytelling it is. It's 67 minutes and so much happens in it.
And you have to remember that something like this is not easy to do, to tell a story that compact.
Yeah.
Especially with all these moving parts, where Roger's going to jail. And it ends with a crazy con job that I could not even follow that has people faking something and then telling the bad guy that they faked it so the bad guy would be tricked.
Yeah. So good movie, The Golden Stallion.
Maybe I'll check out more Roy Rogers films. But I know what I won't be checking out more of. The last film that we watched, The Ghost Chasers.
Now, a Poverty Row episode would not be complete without addressing the Bowery Boys. Mm-hmm. But first, I think we need to talk about Monogram Pictures.
Okay.
Monogram Pictures, I think Monogram is the studio you think of when you think of Poverty Row.
And when people love Poverty Row, they love Monogram Pictures. I've seen books online that say, the Monogram Pictures checklist. What a nightmare that would be. That is a corner of hell where you have to watch all of their films.
Monogram, founded in 1931, they were the most prolific Poverty Row studio. Some of their best remembered productions include Boris Karloff as Mr. Wong, the Chinese detective who was not Charlie Chan. Also, some of the later Charlie Chan films, some of the later lesser Charlie Chan films.
The ones that at one point starred Henry Silva after Peter Lorre stepped out?
So that's Mr. Motto.
Oh my god, I can't keep track of all that stuff.
Mr. Wong had Sidney Toller in it at this stage. And, of course, a lot of Bela Lugosi's worst movies. One of the key figures of Monogram Pictures is Sam Katzman, the Schlockmeister producer who had his Banner Productions label there. And eventually, Monogram Pictures' name became such mud that they just changed it to Allied Artists, you know, without changing anything else about the studio. They changed it to Allied Artists, and they invested a little bit more money into it.
They were a studio as well that were supposed to merge with Republic Pictures, because Republic, we didn't mention this, bought up a bunch of the smaller Poverty Row studios to fall under their banner. But Monogram were such rascallions, they didn't get along with Herbert Yates, so they went back onto their own way.
Well, the later Allied Artists pictures, they said they were going to make B-plus pictures, and then in the 70s they made Cabaret, which won Best Picture, and they made The Man Who Would Be King, and they made Mitchell with Joe Don Baker. So
the classic Mystery Science Theater's 3000 classic.
And now the Bowery Boys.
So the Bowery Boys actually got their start in a pretty prestigious setting with a film called Dead End, which starred Humphrey Bogart. And the Bowery Boys were these rascallion teens and kids that, you know, Bogart kind of, you know, watched out for. And I guess audiences wanted to see more adventures with them.
They became kind of Warner Brothers' Jay and Silent Bob, where they showed up in, I think, 7 or 8 movies between 1937 and 1939, most famously Angels with Dirty Faces with Jimmy Cagney. At the time, they were known as the Dead End Kids. They were, Lower East Side, Irish, I think it's fair to say, like some sort of white ethnic, you know, like,
and they were
two-fisted kids.
They were just like you and me, Will, right? That's who we wanted to see up on the screen.
Yeah, so they lasted for 2 years at Warner Brothers, and then they went to Universal, and they became the Little Tough Guys. Then they went to Monogram from 1939 to 1945, where they were the East Side Kids. And then after 1945, and then all the way to 1959, they were the Bowery Boys.
Now, you may notice a lot of time has passed.
Yeah.
Like, they went from the kids to the boys, and time was not kind to them.
The leader of the troupe is, and in all these incarnations of the Bowery Boys, like, various boys would come and go. But there are 2 guys who are essential. There's Hunts Hall, who's like the really goofy guy, and there's Leo Gorsey, who's the Mo of the troupe. Yeah, Hunts Hall is Curly, and Leo Gorsey is Mo, and the others are Larry. Leo Gorsey, in the film we watched today, Ghost Chasers,
which I saw on the internet was often called the best Bowery Boys film. Yeah. And was directed by Mr. One-Shot William Bodine.
I'm glad we could get one of his movies in here.
I mean, you said it yourself. We can't do a Poverty Row episode without doing a Bodine.
Yeah.
And
if we just changed our podcast and made it an all William Bodine podcast, like we would last forever. He's made like 400 movies.
He has.
Yeah.
And you would probably go insane, or I would learn to love the Bodine as it played. I'm like, oh man, this guy, so good.
Well, I mean, it's just amazing all the stuff William Bodine did. He did like episodes of The Green Hornet with Bruce Lee. He did Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla. Jesse James Meets Frankenstein's Daughter. He did Charlie Chan movies. And, of course, he started in the silent era with Mary Pickford, making real movies.
And it helps that Bodine doesn't care about what he's doing.
Yeah.
Like, in The Ghost Chasers, our Bowery Boys are painfully unfunny.
Yeah, so Gorsey is 33 years old in this movie. Playing a 17-year-old, I guess, and he looks 55. He looks like shit.
Yeah.
Like,
he looks awful. They look like on the doorstep of death.
So the Bowery Boys were some of those comedians who boomers saw a lot, I think, because their movies were cheap and played on TV a lot. Mm-hmm. And they're 4 children.
People like Fred Olen Ray have a reverence for the Bowery Boys that, you know, has been recreated in their own films.
This movie, Ghost Chasers, I think is about on the level of a later Three Stooges movie, like the late Champ, Joe Besser eras of the Three Stooges in terms of how funny it is. And yet, I hate it so much more than those. This movie
Why do you hate this movie so much?
Well, I don't know, because like it has everything that I normally like in a movie. It's like a 65-minute lowbrow black and white comedy with some like vaudevillian knuckleheads in it. Like normally I'm in heaven anytime a movie is like that.
There's some puns that made me chuckle. Like
this movie, again, 65 minutes. It took me 3 sittings to get through it. I just don't like these guys.
Yeah, okay, I can understand
I think
that.
Leo Gorsey is an utterly charmless presence. He is...
You know all the stuff that people say they don't like about the Marx Brothers or the Three Stooges?
Yeah.
Like they don't like each other or they're too mean?
Too mean.
That's all in these Bowery Boys films.
Yeah, when Leo Gorsey smacks Hunts Hall, like, that's not fun to me. Like, Hans Hall is just this goofy guy, and Leo Gorsey's not funny. He's just mean.
Yeah. So when he hits him, it's like abuse.
He looks like an alcoholic.
Because he probably was an alcoholic.
Well, he was, yeah. Actually, a sad end to the Bowery Boys came a few years later when Leo Gorsey's dad died in a car accident, and so he started showing up to the set drunk of the Bowery Boys movies and not being able to perform. So the last, I think, 10 of the series don't have Leo Gorsey in them, which is unimaginable. It's just Hans Hall and a bunch of these... Like, who are the other Bowery Boys?
They're not even children either.
They look older than Leo Gorsey. And they have nothing to do. Like, could you imagine being a Bowery Boy who's not Hans Hall or Leo Gorsey?
I can't even imagine.
They're just there to fill out space.
Yeah. It's bad. I would not recommend it.
But let's say what it's about.
We have to talk more about it.
Yeah. So Ghost Chasers, the boys they come into contact with a phony spiritualist, and then when they expose her, they find out she's part of a ring of con man swamis. So they go to try to expose the scandal, and then meanwhile there's a ghost who only Hans Hall can see. A guy named Edgar who speaks in kind of Elizabethan English.
And also...
He talks to the audience like Alvy Singer, yes.
That's right. Which is a stylistic technique that made me sit up in my chair a little bit.
I think one of the reasons why I didn't like this movie, too, was the fact that only Hans Hall can see this ghost. It was never adequately explained why that was necessary.
That's your stumbling block.
Well,
because he's drunk.
I don't know. Like, the ghost didn't at one point say, like... Maybe he did and I just didn't hear it, but it's like, sorry, the way the afterlife works, I can only be seen by one person. It just seems so arbitrary.
It seems like such a
weird
logical plot.
And then it just added...
Wait. The Three Stooges didn't die when he got hit by a wrench?
And then, it just added, endless, repetitive scenes of Hans Hall going, oh, Edgar told us we need to go into this room. And then Gorsey saying, let me tell you one more time, there's no Edgar, slapping him in the face.
Moment of silence as he looks at his red handprint and goes, why do you hit me?
So yeah, this is considered one of the best Bowery Boys movies. This is I think the only Bowery Boys movie that was nominated for the American Film Institute's top 100 comedies list.
You feel like someone like Leonard Maltin is pushing this in, right? Being like, this has historical importance, so it should be in the collection.
I think, perhaps they felt they needed to nominate a Bowery Boys movie. And I respect...
The fact that they existed for so long.
Yeah.
There's something about that tenacity that is impressive.
Yeah.
But, I know what to get Will for his birthday now, the Bowery Boys collection, Volume 5.
If you do, I'll watch all of it.
No, you won't.
I'm exactly the kind of guy who would just, spend a day watching a bunch of Bowery Boys
Do you
movies.
think you'll get, Stockholm Syndrome at some point?
I might, because, I didn't grow up with the Bowery Boys, so, I grew up with the Three Stooges, so of course I like them.
And if you want to do more research into Poverty Row, this is one of those subjects that is everywhere. There's literally, 25 books written on Poverty Row. We didn't even get into Harry Cohn, whose autobiography was called The Merchant Prince of Poverty Row.
Well, he elevated Columbia Pictures from Poverty Row to the majors.
And he was also an evil producer who did terrible things.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's time to go to letters, Will.
Okay. Sorry, I'm still coming down from that Bowery Boys discussion.
So our first letter is from William Pond, and he goes, "Hey guys, I emailed your podcast a few months ago. Please don't think I am that weird guy who will start emailing every week. I just wanted to pick up on a small point and fight in the corner of a particular hero of mine. In your excellent episode on cinematographers, you paid particular attention to the 1957 film Sweet Smell of Success, shot by James Wong Howe. You credited the majority of the picture's success and excellence to both his cinematography and Clifford Odets' super sharp script, quickly passing over director Alexander McKendrick, stating he is not remembered for much else. While McKendrick's career in America never reached the great heights his debut U.S. picture, Sweet Smell of Success, had, in England he is praised as one of the most important directors of Ealing comedies, alongside Charles Crichton, who you covered on your British comedies episode. His films Whiskey Galore, The Man in the White Suit, and The Lady Killers are classics of British cinema and are regularly reshown on television here. After his directing career in the States fizzled out, McKendrick became Dean of the Film School at the California Institute of Arts, serving in that role for 25 years. His book on filmmaking distills a lot of his teachings and is a book I highly recommend to anyone seeking to learn the craft of making films. I'm sorry that we missed that.
I didn't realize he directed The Lady Killers.
I did know that he directed The Lady Killers, and when Will said it didn't matter, we were on another topic so fast that I forgot. I was actually editing the episode, and I went, shit, I forgot to mention he directed The Lady Killers.
All right. Well, apologies.
And I didn't bring it up, but because I know Will would make fun of it. But I remember that reading an interview with James Mangold, who did the Wolverine and Logan, saying that his hero was Alexander McKendrick, and it makes sense that he was a teacher at a university, which is where James Mangold would have met him.
Well, I'm glad you brought him up.
And he goes, have you ever considered doing an episode on Ealing comedies? Really enjoy listening to your podcast. Thanks, Will.
I would do an episode on Ealing. It's something that I'm actually, is a bit of a blind spot for me, frankly.
Me too.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't seen Whiskey Galore. I've seen The Lady Killers. And
let's put it on the list.
If you want to send us letters, you can do so at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. And this week for our Patreon, we did an episode on the story of Ricky, the classic splatter Hong Kong kung fu picture. And we talked a lot about the director and the genre of Category 3 films that used to exist in Hong Kong around the 90s. That's $5 a month. You can check us out on Patreon, Important Cinema Club Podcast. And next week, we're going to be doing Johnny To, a Hong Kong director that is currently having a retrospective at the Toronto Lightbox.
Best known for his stylish, minimalist crime films, but also a man who's directed comedies, musicals, kung fu films.
He's one of those rare directors that on the surface would look like pure journeyman, but his style is evident in every picture that he makes, whether it be Andy Lau in a fat suit in Love on a Diet, or one of those like noir-inspired comedy films that takes place in a hospital called Help.
And also somebody who I feel like has been like struggling with himself, trying to adapt to, you know, the more rigorous censorship of the mainland.
If you want to do a little bit more reading about him, I would recommend picking up last month's issue of Cineast, which you could find if you're in Canada in places like Indigo, because there is an amazing article with a bunch of Hong Kong directors and the struggle that they have now dealing with Chinese censors and the Chinese film market, trying to make the movies that they already made. And in that interview, I feel like Johnny To is the most vocal and honest out of all of them.
Yeah, it's great.
So until then, my name is Justin McClue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. So I was shocked today when Will said, hey, Justin, let's talk about the Justice League.
Well, so I saw Justice League this week, and I thought it was not very good, but I really liked your take on it when you wrote your Letterboxd review, because you kind of liked Justice League.
I did like Justice League.
And I thought you had a rather, I think, moving take on the film.
So if you're listening to this 40 years in the future, it's apocalyptic, and you have no idea what happened to the Justice League, basically Zack Snyder started shooting this film while the previous film was coming out in theaters. Everybody hated it, but he was already stuck directing it. And he made a film, he showed the rough cut to studios, and he stepped back because his daughter had unfortunately committed suicide. And Joss Whedon, the guy who made The Avengers and who made Buffy the Vampire Slayer, stepped in to do reshoots just to complete the picture.
And to kind of Whedonize it, I think it's fair to say.
He, according to some people, reshot like 50 to 70% of the movie. The film actually starts with a Zack Snyder film over footage that Joss Whedon shot.
It's almost like laughably obvious what is Joss, like, yeah, any scene that is like, you know, super dark and very somber with, you know, and heavily stylized is obviously Snyder. And then any scene that's, you know,
looks like a TV show.
Looks like a TV show, and like the dialogue is very jokey. And in fact, like in the middle of scenes, like Ben Affleck will gain 20 pounds and start joking like in the middle of a serious scene. I
actually found a list on a forum that a visual effects artist put out of every scene that Joss Whedon shot. And it basically breaks down that all the action of Zack Snyder's with particular beats that if you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, Joss Whedon would have brought that. Like Superman using his freeze breath at one point, that was a Joss Whedon thing.
Like, I thought the movie was terrible, but, you know, at 2 hours, it was mercifully briefer than all the other DC films. And also, like, so much happens in this movie, and so much is rushed through. Like, Marvel with their movies was smart to give each of their characters an introductory movie so like they could establish the arc, because all the arcs of these characters are so like ludicrously rushed through.
And you don't know any of these people.
Yeah.
I compared the film to when I was a kid and I got into comic books. They're actually banned in my household for a long time. And when I would go to a friend's house and pick up a superhero book, and it would be like issue 5 and some weird like the Metal Beast Chronicles or something like that. So you'd have Superman and Batman fighting these villains that I go, I have no investment in them. I don't know what is going on. But you know, it's just kind of fun fun to still see them up on screen.
That's what I like about your defense of the movie, because like I think that is if there can be a defense of this movie, it's the fact that it's like pure superhero goofiness, and like there's no and it's like it's almost as if it were a bunch of panels pasted from different comic books into one. Like there's that scene in Wonder Woman's home island, which I'm guessing was probably a Whedon scene.
It was actually a Zack Snyder scene.
It looks like such shit. Like it looks like the special effects were done in 2 months. Like it's a movie that keeps alternating between tones and styles, where it feels like two directors were
struggling to tell a story.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, Zack Snyder, he hates superheroes. Like, he fucking hates them.
I think every Superman scene, almost every Superman
was
scene,
all reshot by Joss Whedon. Anytime Superman opens his mouth, that's Joss Whedon dialogue coming out of his mouth.
And in fact, I think most of the scenes where it's Superman and Amy Adams, they're not even there on the same day.
Every scene where the Justice League is together as a group was reshot by Joss Whedon.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, so there's a lot of tinkering that went on with this.
And Superman's face is a nightmare.
They didn't have enough time. I spoke to a guy who works with visual effects, and he said that the people that worked on the show, 2 extra months, it would have looked seamless. But we didn't. So it looks like that Superman was born with a weird deformity on his top lip.
Well, I mean, this is like what's sad about the movie. I mean, I think this is a movie that I probably would have enjoyed if I were 6 years old. What's sad about it is the fact that it is just, you know, they had a release date and they were going to put something in it, and like it didn't matter what it was.
On one hand, I love all the Superman stuff in this movie, because Superman is so joyful and just doesn't care about the villain when he shows up. The film treats the villain as a joke by the time Superman shows up, to the point that he stops in the middle of the fight to go fly off to save some civilians, and when he comes back, he's like, "This guy's still bothering you?" And he's just basically like...
Painful.
No, that's great! That is Superman! That's the best!
Okay.
Like, the question is what... I mean, I don't want to defend Justice League. Like, that's not the hill I'm going to die on. But there's this idea that, like, this is fun, disposable entertainment, right?
Yeah.
And that's what it is.
Like a shitty comic book that you find on a street somewhere.
Like, as long as it's in some ways fun and, like, I don't want to say it does justice to these characters, but I don't want to jump into a whole defense of superheroes, but, like, what are superheroes supposed to represent? At their base, they're supposed to be, like, people that do stuff that is good because they feel they need to do this good stuff.
Sure.
And I think that, like, when you're a kid and you see that kind of stuff, like, that's important as a kid. And that's what sucks about Batman vs. Superman, which is a movie about superheroes who don't want to be superheroes and hate what they're doing. Anyway.
I think the Justice League should replace Jesus.
Yeah, that's right.
Can we laugh at Ben Affleck just briefly?
Oh, he does not want to be in this movie.
He's, the scene early on when he shaves, and then you get to look at his, like, rum-soaked face. Like his puffy, red face.
I loved Ben Affleck's delivery of half-hearted Joss Whedon lines.
Oh yeah, well, I thought he was pretty good in Batman vs Superman, but
he's fine.
His performance, I don't think, emerges unscathed from this one because it's pieced together from like 3 different shooting.
There's
schedules.
A shot of Batman reacting to Superman's return that will be a gif you will see thousands of times, where he opens his mouth and goes, that made me laugh so hard. And that's all I talked about when I left the theater. I mean, if you're going to make a movie like this, I'll enjoy it if you just continually make fun of the films that came before it. Like, it's constantly saying, like, jokes about how lame the previous film was. Mm-hmm. And it's a film for no one. Yeah. Because, like, people like Batman vs. Superman want that movie again. And that's terrible. Why would you want that movie? And people that want a real superhero movie that makes sense are not going to get that in this either.
It's for 6-year-olds.
Yeah, that's who it's for.
They'll enjoy it. Speaking of movies, I also saw The Disaster Artist this week. I liked it with reservations. It's got a really good James Franco performance. I think the script is good. I think it really captures what's good and what's bad about Tommy Wiseau.
And is directed with the flair of someone that showed up on set and just set the camera on whatever was happening.
It really looks bad, I think. I actually think as a piece of visual storytelling, it's not even as good as The Room.
Well, James Franco's not a very good director.
Well, it just seems like visually it's kind of a missed opportunity, because there's a lot you can do with LA and with Hollywood to convey, like, these Hollywood dreamers in this glamorous city, but the city doesn't have any glamour to it. It's like a handheld eyesore.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed the movie overall.
Because James Franco's performance is so strong.
Oh, yeah.
And so sympathetic while still being crazy enough. Like, people, when he was cast, were going, what, James Franco as Tommy Wiseau? Like, wouldn't you get this person or that person? And he is, like, the perfect Tommy Wiseau.
Well, frankly, I didn't think he would take it as seriously as he did. I mean, he captures Tommy Wiseau's almost uncapturable voice and his speech patterns and stuff. He looks like Tommy Wiseau. He's sculpted his body to look like Tommy Wiseau.
The only thing that's missing is the wrinkles in his face.
Yeah.
And that's it.
But like he captures like Tommy Wiseau's peculiar charm and also his like monstrousness. So yeah, with reservations, a good movie.
Yeah, it's a film that is also, you can feel the people struggling making it, putting all these celebrity cameos because they don't think the narrative will be strong enough to shoulder like the story as it goes along. And so it's in a weird fight with itself. I mean, if someone like, I don't know, a good director had made it.
Yeah.
All I could think of was like Tim Burton. No, he's bad. Milos Forman. No, we don't want him.
Yeah.
All the biopic directors.
I don't know who would make the Disaster Artist. Isn't it sad, though, that Greg Sestero didn't get that Malcolm in the Middle guest spot that would have rocketed him to stardom?
Well, I think what the saddest part about The Disaster Artist, the movie, is the fact that on IMDb, it states that David Dakota plays David Dakota, because Greg Sestero did star in a film directed by Dakota, and none of that is referenced in the final motion picture.
David Dakota hit the cutting room floor.
That's right.
I am sad about that, actually.
Me too.